Hello, and welcome to Plasma is Life. My name is Amy Efantis. I'm the president and CEO of the Plasma Protein Therapeutics Association, and Plasma is Life is our podcast. Today, I'm so honored to be joined by the co-founders of the Jeffrey Modell Foundation. So welcome to Vicki and Fred Modell.
Oh, thank you, Amy, so much for inviting us to join your podcast. We feel very honored, and we're just so fond of you. And I'd like to compliment you on your wonderful leadership of PPTA and all the advocacy you do for safety, for plasma donations, for just keeping our community alive and well. We thank you for your leadership. You are a very, very strong person.
Thank you, Vicki. What a nice way to open this. And I swear I didn't pay her to say that. That was really kind.
And I didn't know it was coming, but I would say, quite simply, we would shout it from the roof. We would say, we got a great leader in our community.
That's great. All right. Well, the Modells are wonderful friends, and we're really pleased that you're with us today. So I know that the JMF headquarters is in Manhattan, and I'm just very curious about what it's been like for you in New York during the pandemic.
Well, needless to say, it was a very unusual experience in New York City. We've lived here our entire lives. And I recently wrote a blog while we were in quarantine that I entitled Bright Light, Dark Nights. And the bright lights were the lights of Broadway, the neon that we always associate with New York City. Mm-hmm. Those lights stayed on, but the streets were dark. The buildings, the office buildings, there was no traffic. You didn't hear the sound of children laughing, of dogs barking, of the usual traffic. All you could hear were sirens from ambulances and fire department and police. And it was really a very frightening and very dark time in New York City. But as you know Fred and I, and you know that we always remain optimistic and positive and always look forward to that next day that promises to be better. And we did. And New York City is coming back.
Excellent.
It's still noisy and it's bright and people are out on the streets. And fortunately for us, the foundation never, ever stopped. We kept working with our staff. We all worked remotely, kept up with our work, and even advanced many of our projects because I think we actually had a little more time to think and to envision the future a bit. So we did very well, and we're happy to say that New York is coming back to life, and the Jeffrey Modell Foundation is always alive.
That's so great to hear. I'm glad to hear that ray of sunshine coming out of all of this. And I imagined that it's sort of like the old adage: if you don't know what you've got until it's gone. That all that the cacophony of noises that you're sometimes overwhelmed with in New York, and to suddenly have it not be there must have been almost almost more alarming than the actual presence of the noise itself and the people and the energy.
Yes, that energy was gone. And we would look out of our windows in the evening and the buildings were dark, even the apartment houses. So many people moved out of New York City, either rented a home somewhere else or went to their weekend homes to live because their children were working remotely anyway, so they could be anywhere. So it was very dark. And now we look out the windows and finally more and more apartments, more and more office buildings, the lights are on. You see people moving in the windows.
Excellent.
So it feels real good.
But I must add that we also learned how to Zoom. We did lots of Zoom.
Yes.
And that's right.
I know you won't believe this, Amy, but it's factually supported by all of the documents. 2020 was the greatest year in our history, in our 34-year history.
Oh,
All
bravo.
centers grew by 15-20%. The patient database grew by 37%. The IVIG usage went up by 36,000 patients, 37%. Transplantation went up, newborn screening. Every measurement, it was our strongest year ever. It's because we were able to focus on what we needed to do.
Mm-hmm.
So I was more astonished than anyone else. I says, "You sure these numbers are right? Show me the supporting documents." They are.
That's great to hear. That's really great to hear. Well, I know that your story, the Jeffrey Modell Foundation story, began in 1970 with the birth of your son, Jeffrey. So tell us about him.
Oh, where do I start talking about this perfect little boy? So needless to say, he came into our lives very wanted, very cherished. We were very young parents. I was extremely young and never imagined that I would have anything but a perfect, healthy baby.
Mm-hmm.
And when he was born, he was, and he was perfectly formed. He was only 6 pounds, but he just was healthy and thriving until he was about 10 months old.
Mm-hmm.
And at that point, I was bathing him in the sink, actually, of a house that we were visiting out in the country. And I felt that he was very, very hot, burning up, and that his skin was slightly jaundiced. And I called the pediatrician. He said, "Come back to New York. I want to see him immediately," which we did. And they admitted him to the hospital. And what seemed like an eternity was about 5 days when a diagnosis came back by a very astute hematologist who said that Jeffrey had an immune system defect called hypogammaglobulinemia. And the prognosis was unclear at the time. And he said, just keep your fingers crossed, keep him out of danger, and don't deliberately take him near anyone who's ill, but go on with your lives. It could be transient, it might go away, and he might outgrow it. So we did. We brought him home healthy, and he was a spectacular, strong, cheerful, humorous, handsome, bright, really bright-eyed and full of personality all his life, in spite of all the obstacles and the interruptions in his life. He never, ever defined himself by his disorder. He always had all his wishes and dreams and hopes, and he went through life as if everything were just perfectly normal, and looked forward to adulthood and what he would be and what college he would go to, etc. He was a really, really an amazing young man. And he passed away when he was 15. But as I have found with children with chronic conditions, when they become teenagers and with the peer pressure and their lives are more interrupted than their friends, they start to feel more anxious about their problems. And that's when he used to plead with us, please do something.
Yes.
Do something for me, to his doctors and to us. So we still hear that. We still hear that mantra every single day. And that's why we work as hard as we do.
And I imagine when you founded when you decided to establish the Jeffrey Modell Foundation, advocacy groups then looked very different than they do today. And I'm sure that you can recall stumbling blocks as well as champions that you had along the way. Can you tell us a little bit about what it was like to start an advocacy organization then, and what were the biggest challenges before you?
Well, I'm going to come in on that one because we started with no money. We had nothing. And Vicki's cousin gave us a check, I think, for $500 to start the foundation.
Wow.
And we set up a board. We set up a medical advisory board. We all got together and we said, we're not sure what to do. What should we do? And they said, why don't you have an expert symposium, a symposium of experts,
Sure.
10, 15, 20 experts. And I said, that sounds like a great idea. Let's do that. And they said, you have to pay for that. It costs money
To raise a lot of money.
So I said, well, where should I go? They said, why don't you go to the IVIG companies that Jeffrey was on? He was on at the time.
Well, he was in the clinical trials, all the original clinical trials of IVIG. And so our thought was that he gave a lot to science and medicine personally.
Yes.
And that maybe they would like to give back now and help us launch this program.
And we really wanted to do it, but I have to confess, it took 6 months until we would finally get the money. And we did raise the money at the time. I think it was Novartis.
It was Sandoz.
Sandoz, yeah.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Which became Novartis.
And we had a symposium, and that was the beginning of putting together a real medical effort in this area.
Yeah.
And then we reached out to a gentleman in Washington because one of the doctors said, listen, if you really want to do this, you got to go to Washington. I mean, they got the money. So we did. We went to Washington and we testified before the Senate Appropriations. And Vicki, you should tell the story about that first day.
Well, I was going to say, though, that in those days, PI was a disorder that wasn't really well understood. There were virtually no treatments, little funding, and we wondered if there would ever be research, enough research that could change the lives of children like Jeffrey. And would there be safer and more effective treatments for these children? So that's what we did in Washington. We asked, could you please provide some funding for research? We really have a long way to go here.
But she was so great, she got their attention. She said, Mr. Chairman, today I want to talk about the other immune deficiency, not HIV, acquired immune deficiency, but genetic primary immune deficiency. And their heads came up and said, wait a minute, are you talking about another epidemic?
Yeah, they were
She got
frightened.
their attention that moment.
That's impactful.
Yeah, and then I said, well, that's the kind of immune deficiency that took the life of our child.
Right.
So let me tell you a little bit about it.
That's
And
amazing.
from there, it's been wonderful leaps and bounds, and we still haven't stopped. We still go and we testify.
Yeah. Yes, I know. And you're a force on Capitol Hill. I know that. So, I mean, Jeffrey clearly lives on in your mission. And I love what you said about Jeffrey's mantra was do something. Did you ever imagine in those early days that your impact would be as impressive as it's been?
We certainly didn't have a plan. That was not the plan. The only thing we imagined was that we would be able to raise enough money to do research fellows and research at NIH and all the wonderful, great academic medical institutions. That was our goal because I felt without the knowledge, there could be no future treatments or therapies without the research.
But Amy, I will tell you that after we met this chairman of the Appropriations Subcommittee in Health, they sent us to Senator Lieberman. And Senator Lieberman declared Primary Immunodeficiency Awareness Week, the last week in April. And that's in the record. And he spoke for about 20 minutes about Jeffrey and about primary immunodeficiency.
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
What a nice thing to do, Senator Lieberman.
He said, I wanted to talk about a young man by the name of Jeffrey Modell. And that's how he began his talk on the Senate floor.
Yeah.
It was beautiful. He was a great,
great.
great advocate for us.
So then I was very practical and I said, what do we do next? We don't know what to do. What should we do next? He said, I'm going to make a phone call and I want you to meet Dr. Fauci. at the NIAID.
Oh, wow.
So we went over to.
You know that guy.
We know who he is.
We went
Now
over there
everyone knows who he is.
because he got a call from a senator. So there were about 12 or 14 around a big conference table, and he came in, and he's a New York guy, and I'm a New York guy. And he said, "What is it that you want to do?" I said, "We want to do research. There's a couple of little problems. You have a lot of money. We have a little money. You have great research. We don't know where to go. What would happen if we did this together? I would come with some money and you would come with more money." He said, "You want to put me in jail? Is that what you're trying to do?" And I said, "No, Dr. Fauci, I won't, I promise." He said, "Let me check into it and I'll call you." 2 days later, he called the office and he says, "You're not going to believe it. There's a thing called the Conditional Gift Fund, and you can put money in there and I can draw the money." And we did 6 R01s, 5-year grants all over the country. And that really put primary
$5 million worth
on
of
the map.
research.
I raised $1 million. I said, "I have to come with $1 for every $4 you put up." And I went to the people, the Griffles of the world and CSL, Baxter at the time. And I said, "Can we do this?" And they said, "We're going to do it." And they committed. And Tony, to this day, still remembers us. He says, "My gosh, you guys, there was nothing in your way. You just went and did it."
But I don't think he thought we would do it that quickly.
Yeah.
He thought he might have a little more time to figure out where the money's going to come from, but we were back there in a couple of weeks.
That's excellent. Good for you for surprising Tony Fauci. Not many people can do that. That's impressive.
I know. And the nice part is that with all of this, I mean, you asked about Jeffrey's legacy. And I think one of the most beautiful things that touches me is that he has really saved the lives of so many children throughout the world that he would never meet, that he would never know. They may know him one day, but that gives Fred and I so much satisfaction. It like fills that void, that hole in your heart that you might have.
Yeah.
It helps fill it.
Oh, that's beautiful.
Yeah.
Someone from just about 2 weeks ago, we got a letter from a doctor in Europe who asked a question at, I think, a symposium of fellows and researchers. When was primary immunodeficiency first discovered?
Oh, yeah.
And she wrote back a letter to us and says the consensus was 1970 with the beginnings of Jeffrey Modell
When
Foundation.
Jeffrey Modell was born.
I said, what about the 25 years before that?
It was so touching.
Yeah.
So touching. It was a European woman who
That's
wrote
amazing. That's a real testament to what you've done, because I think the point is, although, it may have been identified, it wasn't known.
Right.
And you made it known and familiar to people. And I think when you think about advocacy organizations, I worked on Capitol Hill for a long time and spent a lot of time meeting with different advocacy organizations and learning about what people, the kinds of diseases people live with. And it's very powerful. But I think a lot of the general public think about these kind of organizations as being sort of the kind of organizations that share stories. And you do. And you've done that beautifully. I mean, you even produced a movie that's so compelling called Do Something. But I think what people often don't understand is that these organizations have evolved into entities that really rival in terms of your impact what big manufacturers do, what big payers do. And you're not just sort of these receptacles of compelling stories, you're data centers. And there are groups that are actually developing their own therapies. So tell me about some of the things that JMF does that the general public may not know about, but that has had such a huge contribution to science.
Yeah. Well, we set out to do research, physician education, patient support, advocacy, newborn screening, genetic sequencing. Those are the things that we focused on. And there's one thing that happened in, I think it was 2004, 2005. There was a meeting of government officials, and it was held at the CDC. And there were some very impressive presentations. And we didn't know very much about SCID, about severe combined immunodeficiency. And Jeffrey didn't have that. But we knew babies were dying. And so one doctor from Wisconsin stood up. His name is Jack Rudis. A lot of your members may know Jack. And he said, I think I've heard enough. I want to do a pilot program to screen 10,000 babies. I have no idea what it'll cost, and I have no idea where I'll get the money. And I stood up and I said, Dr. Rudis, I just met him. I said, let's go down the middle. Whatever, I don't know what it costs either, but I'll give you half the money and the hospital do the other half.
Wow.
They screened 10,000 babies. We found a baby.
Yes.
The baby was screened. The baby was transplanted. The baby was cured.
Yes.
And he
Amazing.
became the man of the year at our big event.
Our gala. He
Aw.
was this big, he was a little,
And we
didn't
had,
even walk yet.
we had doctors from all over the world who
Yeah.
wanted to have a picture with him.
That's incredible.
So,
So that was a great success. And that started newborn screening for SCID everywhere now.
Yeah, I used to, before I worked for PPTA, I worked for a company that had a drug to treat a rare disease, and we were really involved in newborn screening. And in the newborn screening movement, the Modells are known. I mean, you're known. You are the newborn screening people. I mean, and it's
Wow.
really changed things for parents all over the world. I mean,
Yeah.
in this country, I think has really pioneered that notion that early screening, what it can do to change people's lives.
that's so kind of you.
It really
I mean,
can.
it was amazing to us. And we went out, we met Secretary Sebelius at the time, and we said, will you make a mandate? She says, no, I can't make a mandate. You have to go to 50 states.
Yep.
Go to the governor's mansion, go
That's
to
right.
the legislature, go to the public health departments, but you've got to make the deal. So I said, okay, we'll run around and we'll see if we can. And we really went from state to state.
Yeah.
Came up empty. You talk about obstacles.
Well,
Came up empty.
in the beginning.
Went back to Secretary Sebelius, said, they all tell me, don't you read the papers? This is a rare disease. We have no money. We can't fund this. So she said, you better think about that. Maybe you can. And so we went back and we said, what if we didn't talk about money? What if I committed the money to do this? What else do you want to talk about? And so I made pledge letters to these different states. And when it came time to actually sending the check, which I wanted to do because I made the pledge letters, they said, oh, forget about it. We found the money. I said, why didn't you tell me that in the beginning?
That's great. Well, that's politics 101, right? And I think and it's hard for people to appreciate what that I call that hand-to-hand combat when you have to go, to 50 different states. That's a lot of work. And so
we learned a lot from it, though.
We got
I'll tell you
thrown out of
that.
lots of offices, but
We never take no for an answer. No, it's always maybe, and we politely, because we learned early on in the 1970s and 80s that if you're too loud, if you're too aggressive, too assertive, people stop listening. And so we always were sure to be polite, soft-spoken, but clear in our message.
Persistent.
And strong and persistent. Exactly.
Yes,
But calmly.
yes, indefatigable, I would say, is a good word for you.
Okay.
So I want to talk also a little bit about the genetic testing initiative that JMF has underway, because this really is so exciting. And I think, when you launched this, it was groundbreaking, obviously, but, since its initiation, the gene panel's been expanded, and the involvement, the footprint has grown. And all of this work that's done is done free of charge for the patients, the physicians, the centers, everything. So can you talk a little bit about that and why that genetic testing and that early diagnosis is so important?
well, it really started with the newborn screening. And so if you screen the babies and they're SCID and they can be transplanted, that's fine. But what if they're somewhere in the middle? They're neither this nor that. And we finished the job of doing all 50 states and District of Columbia, Navajo Nation, and
Wow.
Puerto Rico. And then we said, we're done. We have our legacy. And the doctor said, you're not done. You've got to do genetic sequencing. Well, how will we have the money to do that? That's very expensive.
You'll figure it out. You'll figure it out.
So we did a pilot
Just do
program. Right. And what it is that patients and their families have decided I'd say a diagnostic odyssey where they're going from doctor to doctor, where it's very costly, which is very debilitating, and they don't know what's wrong with them. They know something's wrong and they don't know what's wrong. But with gene sequencing, they can have a better clue as to what's wrong.
You know, and then the more and more genes that are identified, the more and more therapies can be developed, like gene therapies and gene editing.
Yeah.
So we went to, I think, 20 or 22 of our centers around the world. How many centers do we have? 300?
We have about 400.
400 centers around the world.
Wow.
So we selected 10 in the US and 10 outside the US, and we did a pilot program, and the doctors loved it because these were the sickest of the patients who they did not know precisely what to do about, how to manage their case. And so the sequencing helped, and they changed their management and their direction, and in some cases cured these patients after not knowing at all what to do. The governments didn't fund it, the insurance companies didn't fund it, and still haven't. We funded it, we continue to fund it. We're telling, I think we have 278 of our centers are part of this program.
Yeah.
And there's 1,072 variants have already been sequenced, and 4,000 variants have been identified in these patients.
Wow.
You're really finding out what's wrong.
Yeah.
This is going to be the future of what is causing the genetic basis of the disease.
This is a really significant contribution to science and humanity. It's not just treating patients today, it's the future.
Yeah.
Right. And we've met some of these children that were babies because we were able to provide the funding to our Roots and Wings program to send them where they needed to go, whether it was to Rome or St. Jude or San Francisco, wherever they had to go for their treatment, their transplants. We sent them, we funded them and provided the funding for the family to stay, sometimes for 9 to 12 months.
Wow. That's incredible.
You know, away from home, sometimes a different language, no resources for extra money. So these families really sacrifice a great deal.
They do. And I think this is a really important point you're raising. And Fred mentioned this too, that there are 400 Modell centers now. So I think this is another thing that I really want our audience to understand is the breadth and reach of your efforts. So tell us about those 400 plus centers, where they are, and why it's so important that growth continue.
Well, the best way to begin is to say we started with 3. We had New York, Boston, and Seattle. And I said to Vicki, well, we have one on the West Coast, and we have Boston Children's and Harvard, and we have New York. I think we're done. And then the doctors said, what you're doing is very interesting. Can't we do that in Paris? Can't we do that in the Karolinska in Sweden? Can't we do that in Asia? And
the plasma producers, the biological companies, they wanted us to do that.
Oh, yeah.
They encouraged us.
It's
and
fantastic.
They helped us. They didn't just encourage, they supported that effort.
Right.
And because of it, there are now 900 doctors in our network at 400 academic medical centers in 315 cities, 86 countries, and growing every day.
Have you been to everyone?
Every day we get a request to come on board. I haven't been to everyone, but we've been to a lot. We've been to a lot of them.
But the greatest thing is that they really, I mean, this is real. They really do work together.
Yep.
No one has ever said to us or to one another, this is my research. I'm not going to share this with you. I'm really focused on this disease. They all share.
They do. It's a
incredible.
wonderful community. We feel so lucky. The immunologists are just incredible people.
Well, and these aren't conditions that exist in a vacuum in the West. These are global.
Right, exactly. And in some populations exist even more.
Yeah.
They're more prevalent. So
So
been a
that's
great journey.
Yeah, it's an impressive journey. So I'm curious, where do you see JMF 10 years from now?
Oh, boy.
I think it's going to be my own view, Vicki's may be different, but my view is that it's going to be breakthrough. It will affect primary immunodeficiency. It'll affect other genetic diseases. It'll affect cancers and other, because we're going to know so much more about the disease. And I think that and the workings of a network is what can really change the face of any disorder.
Yeah.
I think we're headed to a very different place. And frankly, I think that what happened just now with COVID might not happen in the future if they're really set up a program of genetic sequencing.
Yeah.
Amazing.
Even my old friend Tony Fauci said that we're doing 4% of our patients sequenced in the US and over 20% are sequenced in other parts of the country, of the world.
Oh, wow.
So
Okay.
we do need to do sequencing.
Yeah.
Yep.
And I think where I could see 10 years from now, maybe all children will be sequenced routinely.
Yeah.
So that we can discover defects, not only in primary immune deficiency, but many, many rare diseases, and discover it early before there's permanent damage.
Right.
And that the more we discover more genes, there'll be gene therapies, and the gene editing, the CRISPR-Cas9, I think is so promising because defects will continue in family history, and they'll always be inherited.
That's
But
right.
the gene, the CRISPR-Cas9 might be able to eliminate that particular defect in a family.
Right. That technology, which continues to grow, and we continue to learn more, and it continues to become more practicable, and I think it will be more routine in the future.
I do too.
We
That's where I
started with Jennifer Doudna, right, who just won the Nobel Prize, and we worked with her for about a year and a half. Then we spread out to some of her other group, and we're working on CRISPR-Cas9 gene editing, and hopefully there will be an immune deficient patient who will be edited and replace the gene and cured. That's
we invested early on in gene therapy, and people very early on in the 90s, in the early 1990s.
Oh, wow.
And people said to us, "Oh, never in our lifetime. Never will that happen in our lifetime." Now look at how successful gene therapy is. So I'm thinking that the gene editing, they say, "Oh, never in our lifetime." I don't think that that's true. I think it will be.
Yep.
And I think we will all be healthier.
And they certainly said, if you're going to do newborn screening, put away about 20 years to do this. Well, it took us about 20 years.
Yeah,
We had to go to a lot of states, but we did it.
They didn't know who they were saying that to.
Right.
So I think your legacy is again, it's so impressive. So what do you think Jeffrey would say to you today about this legacy?
I think he'd say, "I can't believe all this fuss is about me." Yeah, but I think he would also say, "Thank you for taking my tears and turning it into laughter and dreams and wonder for other children." I think he would have said that.
That's beautiful.
But he might also say, wait a minute, let me see if I got this right. My name is on buildings all over the country. My name is at a building we put up at Harvard Medical School campus, right on the main quad. This is Jeffrey Modell.
And he'd say, "I didn't want to go to Harvard. I wanted to go to Columbia," which he did. But
I think
I'm a New York kid.
He's a New York, and his father went to Columbia, so of course.
But he would have been very proud, and I think he was energized and he was positive. He never looked back. He only looked forward. And I think he'd say, this is a cool thing. This is good.
Yeah, I think he would be very proud of what we've done. It wasn't
sure.
easy to do it alone without him, but he's here. He's with us. He's with us every moment of the day.
Yeah, that's right. That's really beautiful. Wow. Well, and before we leave, I just I want to ask you, since on a light note, since we've endured this pandemic for more than a year now, when you think about reaching herd immunity or whatever that magic threshold is that makes you feel like things are back to normal again, what do you want to do that you haven't been able to do for the last year?
Oh, it's such a
That's
setup
beautiful
question, Amy. My answer to that question is, because I can't wait for it to happen, one more child. If we can meet one child, one family, and say, we can help you. We really can.
Yeah.
And we do. Wow. That's fantastic. That's what I'd love to do.
Yeah. And resume our
Terrific.
travel, to be able to travel and see our immunology centers and meet the families in the US and worldwide. That would be very gratifying. But for the moment, I think I would just like to go around the corner and meet a friend.
Yes, that's right. And be able to hug them and without a mask on.
Because that has been missing.
Right.
Just the very things we took for granted.
But Amy, I want to make sure that I mentioned it, and I'm not being patronizing. Your members absolutely were there at the beginning. I remember Paul Perot came to visit me while I was still in the jewelry business 25 years ago. And he said, what are you guys doing with this foundation thing? And CSL and Baxter and Grifols and Octapharma, I mean, so many of the companies were really responsible for us to take the shot, because I didn't have the guts to do this without them.
They trusted
And
us.
they did, and they still are, and they're very supportive. And no one has turned their back on us. No one has said, you know, you're doing a lot of things, because we don't want it to be about Vicki and Fred. We don't want it to be only about the foundation. We really want it to be about that family, that next patient. That's what we care about.
Well, and I think this as an industry, this patient population is very special. I mean, of course, everyone is, but when you're talking about rare diseases, it is really a different situation. And I think I've never really seen this level of commitment from companies. And so I think you're right about that. It's a really great point.
Oh, they're so generous, and they really care.
Yeah.
Because they really go out of their way to understand the patient's issues, and they really care about them very deeply.
Well, it helps when the organizations are as accomplished and valuable as JMF. So I really want to thank you for being with me today and for sharing with us your story. And thank you for all the fantastic work you're doing. Please keep it up.
Oh,
Thank you, Amy.
So
You
kind.
too.